Hey, in this video, we are going to be looking at a clip from the Lila Rose podcast. Some of you know her. She's a very well-known pro-life advocate, and she has on her show a woman named Louise Perry. It's a very interesting discussion about marriage, partly because Louise is not religious at all, and yet has some interesting takes on the Christian view of marriage.
Feminists are completely right to say that if you live in a society where divorce is an impossibility, that having a tyrannical husband is a terrible outcome. I completely agree with that. That isn't to say, though, that marriage, that the old tradition of monogamous marriage, which is now more or less dead in the West, wasn't fulfilling a very, very important function, which was basically the regulation of heterosexuality, right? Heterosexual relationships are incredibly complicated. Like the coordination problems involved in mating and reproduction are so difficult, and of the very many ways that societies have come up with to deal with that coordination problem, actually monogamous marriage of the Christian model is, I think, that the model that we have, the only model that we've come up with that seems to adequately serve the interests of women and of children.
So one of the things that I appreciate about what she's acknowledging here is something that I think has become increasingly difficult for us to acknowledge. It is easy to see the problems with any system or with any setup. That is not hard to do. And so she's acknowledging, hey, marriage, the way that we're talking about it biblically, all right, one man and one woman together for life with, at the very least, very little expectation or recourse for the idea of divorce. The idea is, hey, you really are in this together. That it's not hard to look at that and see dangers that could come. It absolutely, you can see all kinds of dangers that can come from that. But I think positively what she's acknowledging is that that's sort of life. It's the same way people will talk about, capitalism, socialism, whatever it may be. It's easy to point out the problems in any system. What sometimes is harder is to figure out, is there anything better that we have than this system? And so she's looking at it from the standpoint of women and children being cared for adequately, because women and children are at the very least physically the more vulnerable in society, and often in other ways the more vulnerable. And she's looking at it and saying, gosh, of all the ways that we have of dealing with male and female interactions and romantic entanglements and when children become involved, the Christian model, she's looking at this as a non-religious person and saying the Christian model seems to be the one that works the best for this.
Because the sort of utopian models, the throw tradition out the window and come up with something completely new models that progressives propose, have never actually managed to solve that problem. We have not successfully come up with a better alternative to monogamous marriage. Given the rates of fatherlessness among children now. I mean, in my city of London, half of children now will reach the age of 15 not living with their biological fathers.
It's incredible.
Right, and we know that there are so many adverse outcomes for children associated with that. For all of its flaws, the monogamous marriage model, like realistically, the choices that we actually face if we're looking at the anthropological record are between the monogamous marriage model and the polygynous model, right? So we have one man having multiple wives. That's actually, for most of our species history, has been the most common mating model adopted. It's also a model that has very harmful consequences for women and children, in terms of that it's a model that's associated with higher rates of domestic violence and child abuse, and also all sorts of other unwanted sociological phenomena.
One of the things that I think is valuable, and for those of us who are Christians, that we can take from this is sometimes I think we approach certain countercultural things in God's word, and we can decide we're going to hold to them. Like, we're going to be faithful to the Bible. We're going to hold to these things. But we feel a little bit bad about it because we feel like we're having to ask people to eat their vegetables, or we're having to ask people to do something that, given our own choice, we wouldn't want to ask them to do. And I think that this may fall under this category where, all right, we read in the Bible, hey, it's pretty clear on what marriage is in terms of, all right, we got a man and a woman together for life, partnering together, that's the idea, and that divorce is not totally off the table, but it's almost totally off the table. Hey, we're meant to be in this together. We can look at that and we can say, well, I'm going to hold to what the Bible says on that, but I kind of feel bad about it. I think one of the things coming out in here is that we don't need to feel bad about this. This is not God being arbitrary. I think one of the dangers that we have so much in our culture, especially amongst us as Christians, is we subtly believe that we're smarter than God. And we're like, well, God's God. We're going to go with him on this. But we genuinely believe our idea we think is better, but we're going to have to go with God on this. Our idea is not better. God is infinitely wise, and he is the one that gave marriage to the human race. He is the one that gave us this great gift. We obviously have perverted it. We've messed things. Even in the best marriage, there's things that are wrong and not going the way that they're supposed to be going. So it's easy to see the problems, but the problem is not derived from the idea of marriage. The problem is derived from us. But we get the ability to look at God's great wisdom in this and on other areas of life and not be apologetic. It doesn't mean that we have to be like super hard, heavy-handed every time we're talking about this, but we don't need to be apologetic. This is God's good for his people who he loves, and we can be bold in advocating for it as we talk to other people.
So this is the point that I guess I've come to learn with age, that actually it's very easy to sit atop your high horse, and point out the problems with different traditions or different political systems or whatever. What's much, much harder is tearing them down and then creating something new and better. That's actually a really, really difficult thing to do. And I guess that's a sort of fundamentally conservative insight.
Yeah, the point that she makes there at the end has wide-reaching implications, not just towards the subject of marriage, but towards all sorts of things. On a personal level, what she's talking about right there, I decided some years ago when Gary Keith was still the lead pastor here, I remembered sort of making a rule for myself that I really tried to follow. Because while I loved our church and there was very little of complaints I had about things related to our church, I decided that I was not going to bring up problems that I saw to Gary unless I was willing to offer a solution. And even say, maybe my solution is not the best one. And it was a really positive habit for me to get into just in that context. It's easy to notice problems. And sometimes I think you are in a situation where you don't have a solution, but you still need to acknowledge the problem and at the very least say, I'm willing to be part of trying to figure out a better way on this. I thought, if I don't have a better idea, I don't want to bring this up because that's just me bringing up a problem and putting that on somebody else's plate. What she's saying is so true. It is not hard to see problems or abuses in any system. What is difficult is to figure out, is there some better way that we can do this? And I think that this will apply to our own personal lives. As you look at your personal life, as you look at your relationships, as you look at how you handle things, to say, gosh, if I don't have a better way of doing this, then maybe I need to figure that out. Maybe that's where my energy would be better put. And if in the end, I really don't think that there is a better way to do this, then maybe what I need to do is I need to live within this reality, recognizing that it's flawed and that it can be abused, but live within this reality and look to do the absolute best in an imperfect situation. I think that this is true in many facets of our society. If we're talking about education, if we're talking about capitalism, if we're talking about marriage, if we're talking about our laws, if we're talking about our two-party system, there's all kinds of things that we can look at and we can say, this isn't working right. I think our two best options are to either say, this isn't working great, but within the system, I'm going to do my best to work within it, or to say, how about I come up with a solution and advocate for a solution? Because finding problems is easy, finding solutions is hard. And I think that Louise Perry, even though she's come at it mainly not from biblical reasoning, but from sociological reasoning, is correct when she talks about the idea that God has given us this great gift of marriage, and it's to our own detriment. We're seeing this in society. It is to our own detriment where we try to rebel against this and move away from this, to the detriment of our children, to the detriment of ourselves and to our bodies, as we look to somehow find what we think is a wiser way to handle sexuality, child raising, male-female relationships than the good and beneficial way that God has handed down to us because of his great love and care for us.